13 engineers flagged this unit as a critical fault in 1974. None of them removed it from service before the depot closed. Filiform corrosion require aluminum, high humidity, and a breach in the protective coating. Once the electrolyte channel forms, the corrosion...
A seized roller bearing can generate enough heat to weld the inner race. When that happens at speed, the axle shears and the derailment is catastrophic.
Bearing steel is a high-carbon chromium alloy designated 52100 that achieves a Rockwell hardness of 60 to 6/4 when properly heat-treated.
This carriage was part of a batch of 20, built by Metro Camel for Edinburgh early 1974 to Trimbins. Cast steel in the 1970s often contained sulfide stringers and porosity from the sand can casting process. These ingredients. The original Caledonian blue paint was a single-stage acrylic enamel manufactured by ICI for Metro Camel, without a clear coat.
This. The interior of a long-sealed vehicle creates its own microclimate. Temperatures remain stable between 40 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit.
The door hanger rollers were injection-molded nylon with a glass fiber fill running on an aluminum track. Over 5 decades of the door hanger rollers were injection-molded nylon with a glass fiber fill running on an aluminum track. Over 5 decades of station-to-station condensation cycles. Heavy dirt and rust cleaning is the diagnostic precursor to every restoration. The crust must be removed before the true depth of the pitting can be measured. The bolts on this bearing housing are high-tensile steel grade 10.9 with a black oxide finish that was designed to resist corrosion for 20 years. The crack of a seized bolt breaking free is the sound of crystalline bonds rupturing at the thread interface. When a high-tensile bolt and a steel housing corrode together, removing bolts in sequence and laying them out in order preserves the clamp load pattern. When the bearing cap is reinstalled with new bolts, the original gasket was a compressed cellulose asbestos fiber compound rated to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. After 50 years of thermal cycling and falling is a fatigue failure that begins at a subsurface inclusion in the bearing steel. Once a crack initiates, it propagates upward until a fragment of the case-hardened surface breaks away.
This. Pressure washing uses water accelerated through a narrow orifice to velocities exceeding Mach 2. At 3,000 pounds per square.
Oxide is chemically identical to sapphire, the third hardest naturally occurring mineral on the Mohs scale. When it forms in thick crusts, it creates a protective barrier. The brown film that resists pressure washing is a polymerized layer of diesel soot and mineral dust, bonded to the paint by decades of ultraviolet cross-linking. The pressure washing stage is the threshold between discovery and repair. What was hidden is now revealed, and what is revealed is interior dismantling follows a strict sequence dictated by the original assembly order. The trim must be released before the glass can be extracted. The filiform corrosion under the window trim is characteristic of aluminum vehicles stored in humid environments with chlorides present. Metro Camel used a construction technique on these carriages. Aluminum body panels riveted to a needle scaler works through kinetic energy transfer. The oscillating piston drives the needles forward, they impact the rust crust, and because rust is brittle and non-ductile, rust removal is not a destructive process, it is a subtractive revelation that peels back the decades of decay to expose the original metal surface. What we see here is the exact factory color as it looked in the spring of 1974 when the carriage rolled out of the Metro Camel plant.
The interface between aluminum and steel is a perpetual corrosion risk, because the two metals sit far apart on the galvanic series.
The dual-action sander with 80 grit paper is the intermediate step between the wire wheel's rough stripping and the final surface prep. It removes the wire wheel scratches. Metal prep contains phosphoric acid at a concentration of approximately 30%, combined with zinc phosphate accelerators that convert any remaining aluminum. Self-etching primer contains zinc chromate or zinc phosphate particles suspended in an acid-functionalized resin that etches into the aluminum surface as it cures. A restoration of this scale requires simultaneous work on multiple systems because the paint sequence, the mechanical rebuild, and the structural repairs each have different timelines. The bearing housing was heated to approximately 400 degrees Fahrenheit, causing the cast steel to expand, creating a differential thermal expansion that breaks the corrosion bond. Welding a frame crack is not a cosmetic repair. The weld must restore the original load path through the steel so the bogie can support 10 tons. Metal inert gas welding uses a consumable ER70S6 steel wire electrode that carries the arc current, melts in the arc plasma, and deposits into the joint.
A proper root pass should penetrate completely through the joint and show a slight reinforcement on the backside of the plate.
The flap disc is chosen for weld dressing because its flexible abrasive flaps conform to the slight irregularities of the weld bead. Starting with 60 grit removes the cap quickly. 3 structural cracks were identified in the initial inspection, and the welding of the first 2 represents the repair of the damage that ended the carriage's career. Welding heat expands steel locally by as much as 40 thousandths of an inch, and if the frame is not properly fixtured during welding, that expansion can create permanent distortion. The bearing is heated to expand the inner race by approximately 2 thousandths of an inch, so it can slide onto the axle journal without interference. Bearing cap bolts are torqued to yield fasteners that must be tightened in a specific sequence to distribute the clamping force evenly. The original braking system on these carriages used a Girling-designed wedge-actuated caliper that multiplied the hydraulic pressure. Copper-nickel alloy, known as cunifer, contains 90% copper and 10% nickel with trace iron added for strength. The original cast-iron master cylinder was found to have deep internal pitting from decades of moisture-contaminated brake fluid sitting in the bore. Brake fluid is hygroscopic. The direct mechanical linkage between pedal and master cylinder gives the driver tactile feedback about brake pad wear and hydraulic pressure. The original Smith Instruments speedometer used a mechanically driven magnetic eddy current movement. A rotating magnet driven by the first power-up is the electrician's moment of truth. Every crimped connection, every soldered joint, and every circuit trace succeeds or fails in this instant.
A driver last sat in this seat on November 16, 1974. 47 years later, the seat bends.
The new glass is bedded in a modern polyurethane adhesive that develops a tensile strength of 1,000 pounds per square inch. The sliding door design on these carriages used a parallelogram hinge geometry that kept the door face parallel to the body at all points of travel. Body filler must be applied to a properly profiled surface. The 180 grit sanding scratches create a mechanical key that gives the filler millions of microscopic anchor points. Initial filler shaping is done dry with 80 grit because the coarse abrasive cuts the polyester quickly, and the dry dust allows the sanding pattern to be seen.
The human hand can detect surface deviations as small as 3 thousandths of an inch, finer than many digital profilometers.
The progression from 80 grit to 120 grit to 240 grit on filler represents a halving of the scratch depth with each step. Guide coat is the truth teller of surface preparation. It is a contrasting color applied in a thin mist that remains in every scratch, every pore, and every low spot.
High-build urethane primer is designed to fill sanding scratches up to 320 grit and can be applied in multiple coats.
600 grit wet sanding of high-build primer creates a surface profile measured in microns. The scratches are so fine. The spectrometer captured the exact spectral reflectance curve of the original paint across the full visible spectrum from 400 to 700 nanometers. Automotive base coat is a complex suspension of pigment particles, aluminum flake, and polymeric binders dissolved in a solvent blend that flashes off in stages. The first coat of metallic base is called the orientation coat because it provides a wet bed for the aluminum flakes to land in.
This is Caledonian Blue, the exact color that left the Metro Camel paint shop in Birmingham in March of 1974.
Clear coat is a 2-component acrylic urethane that cures by chemical reaction between the acrylic resin and an isocyanate hardener.
The clear coat will flash dry for 20 minutes at 70 degrees Fahrenheit, at which point it can be handled for masking removal.
Dust nibs are the enemy of every paint job. A single airborne particle landing on the wet clear coat creates a crater that must be sanded and polished out after cure.
The polyurethane clear coat has now fully cross-linked at the molecular level, creating a film that measures 3.5 thousandths of an inch thick.
Masking tape removal must be done within 24 hours of clear coat application, because the tape adhesive will chemically bond to the fully cured polyurethane.
Painting a 60-foot rail carriage requires a modular spray booth and a panel-by-panel sequence, because a booth large enough would require too much airflow. With this final coat of clear on the left flank, the carriage has now received a total of 3.2 gallons of base coat and 2.8 gallons of clear coat. Paint correction is the process of removing the outermost layer of clear coat to eliminate orange peel texture, dust nibs, The diminishing abrasive particles in the compound are aluminum oxide crystals suspended in a lubricating oil emulsion. The finishing polish uses submicron abrasive particles suspended in a water-based lubricant that generates less heat than the oil-based compound. A show-quality finish requires 90+ gloss units, low orange peel, no visible defects, and adequate clear coat measurements. Across the 8 panels of the left flank, the polishing process has removed a total of 0.5 grams of clear coat material, Reassembly is the reverse of disassembly but with a critical difference. Every fastener is replaced with new. Every seal is upgraded from the original specification.
But now it is being reinstalled not as a fault marker, but as an identity, the number that this carriage carried when it was built.
The interior restoration follows the same principle as the exterior. Every original component that could be saved was saved. Every component.
The original flooring was a cork-infused linoleum that degraded in the decades of damp to a soft, crumbled mass.
The final inspection before engine start is a systematic verification that every fastener is torqued, every seal is seated, and every electrical elements. Brake fluid is a glycol ether-based hydraulic fluid with a dry boiling point of 500 degrees Fahrenheit.
A deep cycle battery at full charge should maintain above 10.5 volts under a 100 amp load. Any drop below.
The first crank of an engine that has sat dormant for 47 years is the most dangerous moment in any restoration. The starter motor is a series-wound DC motor rated at 2.5 kilowatts that converts electrical energy from the batteries into rotational torque.
A newly revived engine requires a minimum 15-minute initial run at idle to allow the piston rings to bed against the tinches.
The auxiliary power unit was designed to supply 5 kilowatts of electrical power at 28 volts DC through a belt. Quick Detailer is a water-based lubricant with trace silicones that fills the microscopic pores in the clear coat surface and enhances the gloss. The pre-reveal inspection is the last quality gate before the cameras capture the finished carriage. Every system has been tested, every panel has been polished. In step 1, this carriage was a corroded shell in a collapsed depot, its number 13 stamped into a brass plate beneath a crust of aluminum oxide. Through his pinrace. When Travis pushed open the cab door in scene 010, the seat cushion was a pile of dust and rusted springs. The wind. 13 engineers flagged this as a critical fault in 1974, and for 47 years no one removed it, and no one repaired it, and no one.
Every frame in this video is handcrafted from concept to final edit. A real human guides every step using AI tools. All content is original and follows YouTube 2026 monetization rules.